journalist and photographer too, and has visited Eastern Ghouta as well just over the last few days, I understand. So it'll be good to talk to her. And Vanessa, you're very welcome. What was surprising for me during Murad's report there is that despite, 12 people coming out and saying things that completely contradict what the West is saying, there's no discussion. It's just completely dismissed. Were you surprised by that?
Sadly, no, I wasn't surprised, and I'm certainly not. Well, I am surprised, and I'm shocked. The levels to which Western media has stooped over this alleged event in Duma, and the moral bankruptcy and degeneracy that we're seeing from Western media. I mean, to accuse Russia of basically exploiting a child in using the evidence of 11-year-old Hassan Diab, after Western media has cynically exploited children throughout the history of this conflict. I mean, if we don't have to go back too far to remember Bana al-Labed in East Aleppo, whose father had clear links and associations with terrorist groups during the terrorist occupation of East Aleppo, and how Bana al-Labed's testimony as a 7-year-old child was heavily used and I would say abused by Western media to basically promote a military escalation. So in other words, to promote war. What we see with Russia and this event at the OPCW is an attempt to actually calm down the military escalation and the conflict. And please, let's not forget, when I spoke to people in Duma, doctors, medical staff in the same hospital, in the medical point that received victims on that night, they all also told me exactly the same thing as people are now hearing in The Hague. And also when I went outside and spoke to civilians only 700 meters away from the alleged attack, they were also all saying the same thing to me, that there was no chemical weapon attack. And in fact, in that area itself, we found on that day a new chemical weapon storehouse that was controlled by the terrorist factions, which was Jaish al-Islam, the Saudi-backed terrorist group. But there was also another chemical weapon facility not so far away, which was completely under the control of Jaish al-Islam. And there we did see we saw one cylinder that looked very similar to the ones that they are describing as having been used by the Syrian army against civilians in Duma. But I think also a really important point I want to make on this, Andrew, while the West are crying outrage about the so-called use of this child, what I will say very strongly, speaking to the children in Duma and speaking to their families in Duma, that child and his family will feel tremendous relief that finally their voices are being heard on an international stage, because for 7 years, voices like theirs have been completely muted and ignored and disappeared by Western media.
I know the OPCW is investigating at the moment, but from your own point of view, do you feel there's a whole lot more evidence to come out about this alleged attack that could persuade people one way or the other?
Well, you know, I think one point that Murad made is that it is almost whatever evidence is produced now, it will be perceived as being influenced by Russia or by Syria. I mean, we've already seen the British government and Western media, if you like, laying the ground for saying that Russia had already pre-tampered with the site before the OPCW come in. So we can almost predict that if OPCW find no evidence of chemical weapon use in that area, the next line will be, oh, but Russia tampered with it and sanitized and sprayed air freshener around the site before OPCW could get there. So, you know, what is happening now is that we're seeing the skeleton of the Western media propaganda campaign that has been waged against Syria for 8 years. We're seeing it more and more exposed and more vulnerable and fragile to what is effectively evidence that is coming from civilians on the ground, in this example, in Eastern Ghouta. For example, OPCW found no evidence of chemicals in the Baze so-called chemical weapon manufacturing site that was bombed by the tripartite alliance of aggression, France, Britain, and the United States. And yet I've done a very quick check on Google. I cannot find a single Western media on a Google search having reported that OPCW found no chemicals in the Baze so-called manufacturing site to the north of Damascus. Why not? Why are they not reporting this? They were quite happy to accept that the US, UK, and France claimed that there were chemical weapons being manufactured at that site. And yet, when it's disproven by the very organization that they have put their faith into, it doesn't appear to be being reported, except by, let's say, friendly media to Syria.
And I mean, you talked about perhaps Russian people accusing Russian influence and Syrian influence on the outcome of this investigation, but how important is media reporting, and how much do you think that will influence things?
Oh, I think media reporting is, we've seen throughout the 7 years, this war would not have been maintained without a very state partisan media, both in the US, in the EU, and in the UK. It would not have been possible for this war to have been maintained without that media intervention and aggression towards, I would say, the majority of the Syrian people who support not necessarily President Assad. This is one of these reductionist arguments, but who support their own secular state and who will defend their secular state against external hostile influences. And so I think what is really important here is the aggression that was carried out against Syria by the US and France and the UK was unlawful under international law. It had no basis in legality, and it had, basically Syria was condemned on the basis of an alleged offense, right? This is a very dangerous precedent. We've seen these countries behave in an unlawful manner, but I don't think ever in quite such a precipitous way as this, that could potentially have taken us to war with Russia inside Syria. And we're still, I believe, watching how the media is reacting to what is unfolding in Duma, for example. I don't think we're out of the woods yet. I mean, I believe it was your representative or the Russian representative at the OPCW who said there is potential for further false flag attacks to further escalate this intervention. And I think, we all have to be very aware of this. The investigation inside Duma, we should be looking at both sides, without this mudslinging that's going on. But the aggression carried out by the UK, the US, and France should never have happened without this investigation first taking place. That's the important point.
Sure. And just on the point you said that both sides should be looked at, I mean, even when you bring 12 witnesses and sit them down in front of the media to ask them any questions, I mean, that's their opportunity to find out. And it's just passed off as some sort of stunt by the Russians.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? So basically what they are actually doing is dismissing, again, the Syrian voice. Because what all of us have been doing, Andrew, is trying to actually transmit the voices of Syrians that are simply not being heard in the West. And today, as I said, at the OPCW, Russia introduced those Syrian patriots and witnesses to the media. And as you said, they've basically yet again excluded and censored.
OK, Vanessa, look, we're going to have to leave it there, but really good to talk to you this afternoon. Thanks for coming on to RT. That was Vanessa Beeley, independent researcher, journalist and photographer, and someone